comment left by Vile Intent on my Affliction class changes video brought up a great question about the relationship between Affliction and Haste moving forward. Will Haste be less important now than Mastery or Crit? And I noticed he didn't mention Versatility. Please. Especially now because Dark Soul as a haste cooldown is no longer a thing. We can certainly take a look and speculate into this. I'm going to use Corruption as the first example here. In Legion, Corruption will be a 14-second base duration with a 2-second per tick with no haste. The way dots work now is a constant duration with the time per tick decreasing by the amount of haste you have, rounded down, with the excess duration on the back end ticking for some fraction of a tick. This means haste breakpoints one way with Warlords of Draenor, and that haste scales linearly with each point of total haste you have, granting some fraction of a tick's worth of damage. By total haste, I mean including gear, heroism, and any other sources of haste, and whatever that combined value ends up being. Looking at the spreadsheet I made this morning, the far left is the total combined haste value in 1% increments. Next column is the baseline duration, then the second per tick, which is just the baseline duration divided by 1, plus the total haste, rounded down to the nearest tick. The total number of ticks that can fit in the duration, called the guaranteed ticks. The total guaranteed ticks duration, which is just the number of guaranteed ticks times the seconds per tick affected by haste. The difference of the baseline duration and the guaranteed ticks duration define the excess duration in the back end. And the last column is the fraction of the last dot tick, which is just the excess duration divided by the seconds per tick to represent the fraction of a tick left. If you plot this for the increasing haste values, you find that with each percent of haste, you get an additional 0.07 dot ticks per duration, or 7% of a tick per haste percent. Unstable Affliction is similar, with 1% haste being worth 0.04 or 4% of a tick. Agony is worth 0.09 or 9% of a tick. However, we need to normalize this for a single dot tick duration to compare it to the other stats. So for Unstable Affliction, each percent of haste gives 4% of a dot tick per duration. It ticks 4 times in 8 seconds. So it is a 1% additional dot tick per tick. It is likewise 1% additional dot tick per tick for Corruption and Agony. So a long roundabout way of saying each percent of haste is worth 1% of the dot tick. Common sense, right? Crit as a stat is going to be slightly more significant than it has been previously. As it is now, crit is just a chance to tick for double damage, which is more easily calculable in terms of dot ticks. Each percent of crit is effectively worth 1% of the amount of dot tick damage, which is the chance to deal double damage times the amount of increased damage, which is the crit double damage minus baseline, which just equals baseline. In Legion, the Deadwind Harvester artifact weapon is increasing the critical damage by 10%. So instead of 100% increased damage for crits, meaning double, it is 110% crit damage. That means that instead of 1% crit equals 1% dot tick damage, 1% crit will be equal to 1.1% dot tick damage, or 10% more valuable per percent than haste. In regards to Mastery, Mastery Potent Affliction determines the value of Mastery. Currently in Legion Alpha, it increases the damage of Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction by 25% baseline, plus each percent of Mastery from gear, buffs, etc. Increases the damage of the dots by that percent, so each percent of Mastery is worth 1% of these 3 dot ticks. Mastery does not affect the other spells, Drain Life, Haunt, Siphon Life, Drain Soul, Reap Soul, etc. And it does not increase the damage of your pets as Affliction. By contrast, Haste, Crit, and even Versatility do affect all of these, adding to their value as a stat over Mastery. Versatility is straightforward, 1% of Versatility increases your damage by 1%. So looking at these 4 stats comparatively, 1% Haste is equal to 1% of a dot tick, 1% Crit is equal to 1.1% of a dot tick, 1% of Mastery is equal to 1% dot tick, and 1% Versatility is also 1% of dot tick for the 3 main dots. For everything else, Drain Life, Drain Soul, Haunt, Reap Soul, Siphon Soul, and Pets, Haste, Crit, and Versatility are the same as we just stated, but Mastery is completely useless. Now, this so far would suggest Crit is going to be the most worthwhile stat. However, on to the second point I'd like to make. Each stat's relative value is an effect of the gear's points per percent ratio for all the stats. If the gear's point per percent ratio of the stat is tweaked, then the number of points of the one stat do not translate to the same percentage of that stat, affecting its relative weight to the other stats on an equal percent basis. Do you get all that? Alright, so for example, currently 90 points of haste is worth 1% haste, 110 points of crit is worth 1% crit, and 35.48 points of Mastery is equal to 1% of Mastery, and 130 points of Versatility is 1% Versatility. If this is tweaked to reduce the required points per percent of crit, then this makes crit more valuable on gear than haste because you get more bang for your buck percentage-wise. Likewise, if a stat buff like eradication still exists for Affliction, which currently grants 5% more haste from all sources, this will change its weighting as well. So translating the current stat per percent ratios on live servers back to the 3 main dots on a percent basis, 1 point of haste is equal to 0.011% dot damage, 1 point of crit is equal to 0.0091% dot damage, 1 point of mastery is 0.0282% dot damage, and 1 point of versatility is 0.0077% of dot damage for the 3 main dots. And so by this, it looks like mastery is worth more than haste point for point. But since mastery does not affect haunt, the damage of drain soul, reap soul, pets, etc., the actual relative value for mastery is lower in practice. And because the dark soul cooldown buffs haste higher than it is shown here, the two stats are just about equal for Affliction. These are followed by crit and lastly versatility. Which brings up the last point I'd like to make about Dark Soul as our increased haste cooldown. The removal of this cooldown does not affect the value of haste as a stat for Affliction. It does affect the point for point value compared to the rest of the stats because Dark Soul applied multiplicatively to our current haste levels, making each point of the stat we had on our gear go a little bit further. 30% further to be exact, while the cooldown was active. For example, if you have 20% haste from your gear and use the 30% haste buff, the resulting haste is not 50%, but 56% because it's the 1.2 ratio from the gear multiplied by 1.3 from the buff, and that's 1.56, or 56% total haste level. The end result is the point versus point values for haste will not be weighted as heavily as they have been because we aren't getting 30% more free points from Dark Soul cooldown. So in summary, the value of haste is being reduced to be about equal to crit. Mastery so far is remaining elevated. I think the point per percent ratio of mastery will need to be increased from the 35.5 to about 70 or even 80-ish%, and then it will be in line with the other two. Versatility should just go away. The problem with versatility is it is expensive for the amount of damage you are getting. The reason is because they need to account for the damage taken reduction into the value of the stat, and that's why it costs so many points for so little damage done. For DPS, this is what makes it such a bad stat. You are paying for damage taken reduction when you don't want it. The easy way to think about versatility is to correlate it to resistance-based gear for requirement for raids in the past. You would seek resistance gear to stay alive at the cost for being able to do more damage. This idea was removed in Wrath, basically right after Nax. The damage taken reduction included with versatility is a sideways means of reintroducing this bad idea. Get rid of versatility on DPS gear. While the exact stat weights are yet unknown because everything that affects them is still in flux, hopefully this video will assist you moving forward to make better gear choices. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please like it. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or feedback, please leave them below. And if you're new around here and would like to see more, please consider subscribing. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.